But again, Pilar Thomas. And so I'm going to try and make kind of federal energy policy exciting this afternoon and talk a little bit about what is kind of happening at the federal level. I had alluded to it as the last bullet in my presentation yesterday about this 180-degree turn on federal policy. So I'm just going to point out some high-level stuff that's taking place in the federal side, both on the executive branch side and then legislatively, and point out maybe some areas of opportunity for the New Mexico Pueblos and tribes to, one, participate in what's happening on the federal executive side, and two, kind of raise your voice to your senators, who I think we're still hearing from Senator Heinrich today, I think, right? So, hopefully we'll raise our voice to our senators and our three representatives. You have Representative Teresa from, I think she's first district here. So there's some stuff going on in Congress I'm sure you're well aware of, but I just want to maybe point out some aspects of what's going on that's relevant to tribal energy, and I think would be a good idea for tribes to think about and the Pueblos to think about how to participate in that. And I've asked to talk about this from kind of our tribal sovereign perspective, because we stand in a very unique position vis-a-vis other low-income communities, other environmental justice communities, other disadvantaged communities. And so when I talk about some of the stuff that's happening, I'll talk about how we sit in a little bit better position than others and how we sit in a little bit worse position than others. And so maybe we can figure out how we kind of fix that on the federal side. I have up here state, I'm just, you've heard from Commissioner Maestas about what's happening with the PRC activity. I will admit I am not an expert in what's happening in kind of your state regulatory processes. I understand regulatory rulemaking and utility rulemaking kind of in general. But I will point out some things that I think beyond kind of the Community Solar Act that are tribes should be thinking about in Pueblos. Let me start with a component of President Biden's executive order on climate change. And this is one of the longest executive orders I had seen. It's about 30-something pages long. How many people are familiar with this executive order or have read it? Okay, I don't blame you. So in this executive order was a whole bunch of stuff around climate change. And thrown in there was this question around environmental justice and what President Biden labeled his Justice 40 initiative. And in that Justice 40 initiative, the idea is that 40% of the federal investment or the benefits of the federal investment should go to quote unquote disadvantaged communities. In a recent guidance that came out from the House Domestic Policy Council, the DPC, who's in charge of the Justice 40 initiative, it's a government-wide initiative, there is no definition of disadvantaged communities. There's about 4 or 5 factors or considerations. Tribes are not explicitly mentioned as disadvantaged communities. But when you read the factors of what's included, most tribes will likely be considered a disadvantaged community. For the tribal programs, Office of Indian Energy, which services only tribes, or all of the interior BIA programs, this is not going to apply, right? Because it's already servicing tribes. So the real key opportunity here for tribes is the other federal programs that tribes can access. And so they've started a pilot. They've picked 21 pilot programs, but the key is what are some of the covered programs? What are they going to look to across the federal agencies for what's considered part of the Justice 40 initiative? So they have defined covered programs as programs related to climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, training, and workforce development. So all the things that we have talked about community solar can represent for tribes and Pueblos. Some of the benefits of community solar. What are the covered investments? Financial assistance, grants, loans. Direct payments are usually tax payments or other entitlements, and federal procurement. So one of the key opportunities that tribes and pueblos have, and I know tribes, the Pueblo of Jemez, for example, many years ago, was looking at trying to figure out how to sell power to Los Alamos National Lab. I think at one point when I was at DOE, Tahajali was trying to figure out how to sell power to Sandia National Lab. So this idea that the benefits of federal procurement, the federal government is the world's largest energy buyer. The Department of Defense is the largest buyer of that power in the federal government. And you've got Kirtland, you've got the labs, which are part of DOE. So you've got other federal agencies here. So that's the idea of what federal procurement is. And then lastly, there are 21 pilot programs. I picked out the pure clean energy programs. For the life of me, I don't remember what BRIC is. I put it in there. And then I'm like, what is BRIC? But WAP is the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is an energy efficiency program done by the Department of Energy out of the State Energy Program. Tribes are eligible to directly access those funds for weatherization for low-income households. That's going to be a pilot project. The key there is it's already geared towards low-income households, so I'm not sure why it's in there. Those are already disadvantaged communities. But more tribes should take advantage of the WAP, weatherization assistance, and especially since at the end of last year, the American Energy Act amended the weatherization assistance program to authorize the use of those funds for rooftop solar. So you can do a combination of rooftop solar and energy efficiency through the WAP program, but this is one of the pilot programs. CETO is the Solar Energy Technology Office. They now have a massive push around community solar. I encourage you, if you're following it, to subscribe to the DOE CETO listserv. You can just go into DOE, type in Solar Energy Technology Office. They're at the bottom of their page is a subscription, and you'll get all the information. But they've committed now to trying to push community solar on 5 million households. They've done a lot of community solar work over the last 3 or 4 years. And yes, even during the Trump administration, they had a massive push. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars in it. There are several tribes, including Blue Lake Rancheria, who I mentioned yesterday, who is in the CETO program getting funding to promote community resiliency. And if you're interested, there's actually a workshop on Monday morning on community resiliency hosted by Blue Lake. So CETO is a part of this, and they have this massive emphasis now redirecting money into disadvantaged communities. DERA stands for the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. If you have diesel engine vehicles, school buses, work trucks, or stationary diesel, which, these folks probably have as backup power. The casino down the street probably has as backup power. DERA, Diesel Emission Reduction Act, has a set aside for tribes, and it allows you to get 100% replacement costs for diesel engines. You can repurpose, you can refurbish, you can buy a whole new engine. You can't buy the whole new vehicle with it, but you can buy the whole new engine. Or you actually can buy a whole new electric school bus with it. They just announced 2 weeks ago that the DERA program with the ARPA money that EPA got, EPA administers that, you can get a 100% replacement cost up to $300,000 for electric school buses to replace existing school buses. So I encourage you to pay attention to these. DERA usually goes out with a request for proposal around April, May of every year. They've already gone out with that. They've already closed it. So start making your list of all your diesel engines that you want to get replaced, and wait for that RFP to come out early next year. LIHEAP, Low-Income Household Energy Assistance Program. I don't know how many folks are getting LIHEAP. Again, tribes and tribal housing authorities are directly eligible for LIHEAP. And then finally, REAP, which did the USDA guy this morning mention REAP? The Rural Energy for America program. They don't usually get much money. They've been kind of starved over the last few years. But this past appropriation, they got about $100 million. The current bills propose a massive increase for them. So, and again, focusing, tribes are eligible for REAP. Tribal enterprises are eligible for REAP. And REAP can be used for renewable energy projects for tribal enterprises. Tribal governments can't get money for the projects. They get money for energy audits and feasibility studies, but not for the actual deployment dollars. So unless am I contradicting what he said this morning? Just to make sure. Well, we're trying to get them to change that. So in any event, this is part of this Justice 40 initiative, trying to redirect funds into disadvantaged communities. Another big executive effort, of course, is the Recovery Act, right? The COVID Recovery Acts. We had the CARES Act, we had COVID relief of 2020, and then we had ARPA. And across those three laws, tribes got about $50 billion in funding. That's 50 billion with a B. So there are huge opportunities in some of these COVID relief programs and recovery programs to use these funds for energy efficiency, and recovery infrastructure. So for example, the Fiscal Recovery Fund, which is ARPA's $20 billion pot of money to tribes, there's a component of that says you can use the fund for governmental services. They don't define that, but they do say it's infrastructure that isn't part of the infrastructure budget, right? The infrastructure budget was water, sewer, broadband. To which I said, well, no energy, no none of those. So why can't we do energy projects with these? I can't move water without power. I can get broadband, but if I can't power my computer, what the heck's the point? So they at least did say, if you're going to do a water, sewer, or broadband project and you need energy to actually make that project work, then you can use those dollars for the energy component of that project. So if you wanted to do a new water system, you could put a nice little solar system right on it to power that water system and use your fiscal recovery fund to not only pay for the water system, but to also pay for the solar system. Yes. Yep. Yeah. But this governmental services bucket, which is kind of limited by how much money you lost. So if you got, I'm going to just make up a number, if you got $10 million in fiscal recovery funds and you do their calculation and it looks like you lost in revenue over the course of the pandemic, $7 million, you can use 7 million of that 10 million for quote unquote governmental services, which is anything except lobbyists, which by the way, I'm not, so you can pay me, but you can't pay JD over there. So, so that's one way to do some more energy projects. Another way is in the consistency funds bucket. That's a $500 million pot. 250 million that was supposed to be available to us October 1st. We haven't heard anything from Treasury yet. And then another 250 million next year. So another 500 million, and that's also for governmental services, except lobby. So if you get funds out of the consistency fund and nobody knows how we're going to get money out of that, what Treasury is going to do, those are Treasury programs, no idea how they're going to allocate it because they haven't done any consultation yet. If we have anybody in the ether from Treasury, remember, you have to consult with us on this, but that's another source of funding for energy projects. Homeowners Assistance Fund, which is also a Treasury fund. Tribes got $500 million in homeowners assistance. Those can be used for energy efficiency and weatherization for your tribal members who own their homes. So if you have a tribal members that come to you and go, oh, I want to upgrade my home, I want to put in an air conditioner, I got indoor air quality problems, we're all here for COVID, got to stay inside still. And by the way, I don't want to pay more in my electric bill, so can I have some solar panels as well? Then you can use your homeowners assistance funds to do that. HUD's ICDBG, they got $100 million in the CARES Act. Anybody here get the ICDBG CARES money? That's a competitive grant. You got it for ARPA. So HUD, when the CARES Act was 100 million, and every single tribe who applied and got funded used it for energy efficiency and rooftop solar. And HUD pushed that money out in about 60 days. They now got $280 million more. So if you're looking to do energy projects on your facilities, whether it's your community facilities, your senior center, your homes, your tribal homes, HUD ICDBG is another source of funding, $280 million for that. Yes, sir. You know, the grants that I saw that people got were all just energy efficiency and rooftop solar. So I don't know the answer to that question of whether you can do natural gas hookups. But you know, you don't want to do natural gas hookups anyway, right? As we've been hearing, the goal is electrification of everything. It's getting off of natural gas in homes and in buildings and electrifying everything. So that's what you should be thinking about. It's obviously up to you, but that's where everybody's going, right? Because I can put solar panels on my house and power my water heater that way. If I got to worry about natural gas, I got to worry about Texas blowing up again and my natural gas now costing me a fortune. Yeah, I mean so the ICDBG again was for energy efficiency and renewable. Commerce's EDA, $3 billion in ARPA, $2 billion in CARES Act. So there's money out there in all this COVID recovery, and then LIHEAP got another $3.5 billion. They got a total of $8 billion in a year and a half in LIHEAP for COVID. So if you're not in the LIHEAP program, I strongly recommend you get to HHS. They're the ones who administer LIHEAP through your housing authorities and start getting some of this LIHEAP money. Okay, I know I'm running out of time. Let me just talk quickly about what's happening, at least on the legislative side. And obviously there's a lot more going on the executive side. You heard from DOE, you heard from USDA around funding. There's a lot of other stuff happening with respect to policy. But there's still a lot of work to be done on the legislative side, because as good as the policy work can be and the administrative cleanup that's happening on aisle 6 now because of the previous administration, we still need some fixes in our legislation. So we've got the 22 appropriations bills that have, one's come out of the Senate, one's come out of the House. They're not all there. They're in a CR right now. But if we get another omnibus bill, all the energy programs in the federal government have all had their funding substantially increased, all of them. So that's the good news. There's going to be more money in some fashion for energy from the federal government. The Senate infrastructure bill, which has only come out of the Senate, it's sitting in the House, as I mentioned yesterday. All the energy programs, there's a title on energy. It's about $180 billion. There's nothing specific for tribes, but tribes are eligible for virtually every program that's in there. So, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. The Senate reconciliation bill, which is just kind of a general number, again, no language out of the House either. But in at least the instructions on the Senate side, there's $20 billion set aside for the Indian Affairs Committee. And Indian Energy is one of the list of the things that they have to put money towards. So we don't know what their allocation is going to be. Of course, we don't know what the final number is going to be. And so weighing in on especially the reconciliation bill and keeping, for example, the Indian programs off the chopping block, right? They're going to go from $3.5 trillion to something. And so the question is, it's going to be somewhere between 3.5 and 1.5 trillion. So are they going to cut our 20 billion? Or should we try and maintain our 20 billion that they've allocated for us so far? So that would be one area to try and promote saving the tribes in the reconciliation bill. Senator Lujan has introduced what's called the Community Solar Programs Act. He's done this a couple of Congresses now. He did it in the House. He's done it now in the Senate. And this is important because under federal law, remember, the feds only regulate wholesale power and interstate transmission. The states regulate your retail distribution, so PNM and the co-ops. But there's this law called PURPA, the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act, which provides guidance to the states on taking action on certain regulatory policies, like net metering, for example, like integrated resource planning, things like that. So what Senator Lujan has proposed in his bill is to amend PURPA, the federal law, that in effect instructs states across the United States to take into consideration a requirement that their regulated utilities have community solar programs. So it would basically nationalize an effort to promote more community solar. Now, of course, New Mexico already has a Community Solar Act passed by state statute, but in a lot of states, it's the Utility Commission who regulates those programs. So this is an effort to try and get states themselves to act on more community solar opportunities through their regulated utilities. It does thankfully exclude tribal utilities from that. So even though tribal utilities aren't subject to state jurisdiction, just to be safe, we had to make sure there was a specific exclusion, because I know Acoma was here earlier. Is Acoma still here? No? Okay. Oh, so just to be safe, you know, Acoma, Jicarilla, Navajo, and then the tribes in Arizona. Access to Solar Coalition is an effort. It's a grassroots effort of a lot of low-income, disadvantaged, and communities of color organizations that are trying to promote more solar access. They've included tribes in that. There are a couple of tribal organizations that are part of this coalition, and they're promoting a lot of legislation to promote more solar access for low-income and disadvantaged communities. And then, oh wait, back up real quick. And then we've got, okay, I'll get to it in a minute. So I already talked about what's in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. This is a list of all the major programs that are in that law. And tribes are eligible for all of these major programs. And in fact, some of them, like pump storage hydro and battery manufacturing and recycling, there is a requirement that the Department of Energy give priority to programs and projects that are doing pump storage or doing battery that have tribes involved in the project. So if you have any interest around pump storage or battery manufacturing, you've got a bit of an edge than anybody else. Reconciliation bill, who knows? Nobody knows where that's going. Access to Solar Coalition. I think everybody's going to have a copy of this, but this is just some example of some of the things they're promoting. They want to see, there's this idea of what's called a clean electricity payment program, CEPP, that would pay utilities to begin to generate and use more renewable power, and then penalize them if they don't. And so this coalition has said, you need to make sure that a portion of this is coming from distributed energy resources, and that low-income communities are going to benefit from those requirements. In addition, there's these tax provisions, and you've probably heard about financing and tax credits and all those things, and that tribes can't do tax credits because we're not taxable. So there's also an effort to create some bonus tax credits for projects done in disadvantaged communities, which in the language provided explicitly includes tribal communities. So that means if the tax credit is 30%, then if somebody did a project on tribal lands serving the tribal community, they would get a 30% tax credit plus a plus up of another 10% or 20%. So that would incentivize putting clean energy projects in tribal communities. Interconnection costs is eligible for ITC. So you heard from the affordable energy guy today about I might have to upgrade the substation. I might have to pay for a new transmission line because the current line doesn't have capacity. And I might have to build out a new Gentie line. So this says those should be included in the ITC. Today, they're not. All I can put in the ITC is my solar project and maybe my storage if it's next to it. So that helps buy down the cost of those costs. That would be really critical. Assets for non-taxable entities, including tribes. So today we don't get tax credits because we're non-taxable. We have the same problem. Other governments have that problem. Nonprofits have that problem We don't pay taxes. So this would say, yeah, you can get the tax credit as a grant. A grant in lieu of a tax credit would be the idea. And then lastly, let me end on this list, at least with direct pay for optional, for residential ITC. So if you own your own home and you want to put a solar project on it, you get a tax credit for it. What used to be 30%, it's a little bit less than that now. Well, first of all, you have to have a tax liability for that tax credit to matter. So if you're low income or moderate income, you may not have a tax liability at all. You could still own your home, right? But I don't owe taxes, so the tax credit doesn't do me any good. So I have no incentive to put renewable solar on my house because I'm going to pay for the full thing. So this would say, one, they want to make it refundable. So if I get a $7,000 tax credit and I only owe $5,000 in taxes, then the federal government would write me a check for $2,000. So I get the full $7,000 benefit. That's the refundable component. The direct pay component is I don't have $15,000 to buy a solar project to get my $7,000 tax credit later. So what they would do instead is they would write you a check now for $7,000 and you can use it to then build the solar project. So those are some critical asks that are being made right now to Congress as part of the Reconciliation Act. So if these are the kinds of things that the Pueblos and the tribes would support, then I encourage you to let your senators know this is something we'd like to see in the reconciliation bill. And then the last piece on the federal side is what's called the Indian Energy Development Act. It's being sponsored by Senator Kelly out of Arizona. Senator Heinrich has had some information on this as well, but it's basically taken, this is the 2005 Energy Policy Act has not been fixed for Indian tribes since 2005. So it's already a 16-year-old bill. We have some challenges in some of the language in that bill, especially around the Indian Energy Grant Program and around the Loan Guarantee Program. So this bill would actually amend the DOE grant program to make it easier to expand the kinds of things they can do grants for, like workforce development and internal capacity building, expand them to make sure they include grid resiliency. So again, if I've got to build out a power line, today the DOE grant doesn't cover that gen-tie line. It doesn't cover the substation costs to upgrade. So this would expand the authority of the Office of Indian Energy to fund more parts of your projects that they don't fund today. It would amend the power marketing authorities. You guys aren't in WAPA here. Is WAPA here? Western Area Power? So, okay. So one of the things, WAPA, losing hydropower, right? Hydro's disappearing before our very eyes. They have to keep buying power in the open market for all the people they have contracts with. So this would require them to buy power from Indian tribes. So if you want a buyer, remember the federal government, largest purchaser of power on the planet, this would amend it so that WAPA and Bonneville Power have to buy your power if you offer it to them. Kind of like qualified facilities under PURPA. Got to take it. You got to buy it from me. The DOE loan guarantee program needs to be fixed. They've never made a loan guarantee under it. They've made it worse. The Trump administration made it worse. These guys haven't moved fast enough to fix it. So this language would fix it for them. Make it easier to get loan guarantees, expand who's eligible for loan guarantees, and have the government pay for the subsidy cost of the loan guarantee itself. It would fix the Right-of-Way Act to make it the same as the Hearth Act. So allow tribes to approve their own right-of-ways, just like they can approve their own leases. Important because I got to do gen-tie lines. Doesn't do me any good to have a leasing regulation where I can approve the lease when I still got to go to the BIA to approve the right-of-way. So this would create a similar circumstance for right-of-ways. Fix that Internal Revenue Code so we can get the tax credits, and fix the Federal Power Act to ensure that tribal utilities are exempt from FERC oversight. Right now, that's a matter of FERC administrative policy, that tribes are not subject to the Federal Power Act or to PURPA, but this would ensure that we actually are by statute. Okay, with that, I'm I'm not going to talk so much about this. Everybody knows what to do here in the state, but I put the slide up because it said federal and state on the title. So with that, I know I'm a little bit over. I apologize, but do we have time for questions? We'll take questions later. I think we had questions earlier. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. Write your senators.